How you doing, folks? George here with Window Mechanic, and this video is to help teach you how to rescreen your screens. Window Mechanic does window repairs. We do installations also, but everybody does installations. But our niche seems to be glass repair, screen repair. We replace hardware, springs, cranks. In the business, they're called operators on those casement windows that swing out like a door. So anyway, today we wanted to show you how to replace a screen in your window yourself. There's a couple of things that you should know about rescreening. And some screens on casement windows, the screens come out to the inside. All of those crank out windows and awning windows that go out from the bottom out, those screens are always on the inside, obviously, so they don't interfere with the movement of the window. And the screens are taken off from the inside. Then there's the old-fashioned kind of wood windows that have the storm windows on the outside, and you have to open up the wood window, and obviously those screens also come into inside the house, into the inside. But the replacement windows, you have to you can pull them out and bring them into the inside, or you can pop them out from the outside. Either way. And basically, what's happening with a replacement window, I got two different types of replacement windows here. These are your vinyl replacement windows that you've probably seen, where this particular window is actually not a double hung. This particular window is a slider, which slides side to side, like sliding patio doors. So you could change a screen on a slider like this. When you have a screen in the slider, usually what happens is that the screen has to go up in order to pop it out, because the screens have C-springs on them. And how that's put together, we could talk about that in another video. But basically, wherever the C-springs are, that's the direction you have to push the screen into in order to be able to pop it out. So let's change the screen on this slider, and then I also have a up and down double hung type of window that tilts in for easy cleaning, a vinyl window, and I'll show you how to replace the screen on that as well. So I thought this was a double hung, but now I see it's a slider. Whenever you see a window drop like that, you know that this got no springs in it and it's a slider. So pulled one out of our shop, and this is just a slider that we had laying around that we never used. And after you repair the screen, then you just pop it in the same way you pulled it out. For example, the C-springs go to the top, so you push the C-springs up and then push the bottom in, and it drops in. And with a double hung window, instead of it going up and in, on an up and down double hung window, when you the screen, usually the C-springs go into one side and pop in and go in, so they go sideways instead of vertically. It installs horizontally. This is a spike that basically, when you have, instead of buying these, what happens is when I have a Phillips screwdriver or a flathead that goes bad or it wears out, I just grind the tip to a point. And it's always handy to have a tool like this, because you could use it for pulling out the old spline. By the way, the spline, that's this rubber stuff that holds the screen in position. I mean, you could use a tool like this as a punch also, but it's good to have something. You could use a sharp nail, I suppose, but this is handy to be able to pull the old spline out of the window. And you can't really get the old screen out unless you pull the spline out. And if the spline is still in good condition, you could probably reuse it. Whereas this spline is in good condition. But if the spline is in really bad shape and it's cracking and it's falling apart, then you buy more stuff, and there's different thicknesses of spline, but usually the ones that are used for residential windows are about 1/8 of an inch in diameter. And a lot of times when you buy your screen, wherever you buy the screen, Home Depot or whatever, they sell spline there also. Sometimes if you're making a new screen from scratch, they sell the screen framing material, and it comes with the spline right in it. But like I said, unless your spline is falling apart, you could reuse the old stuff, and if you need new spline, you could come to windowmechanic.com, or there's other places on the internet where you could buy spline. We have plenty of it in stock, all different kinds of sizes. So anyway, you pull the spline out, and then you just take your finger and you basically start in the corner and pull the old screen out. The screen usually is kind of in there because over the years the sun is sort of kind of like melted it a little bit into its position, but it comes out relatively easy. And if you have really old stuff that's really in there, you might have to go in there with a little flathead or something and scrape out the old stuff and get it nice and clean before you put the new screen on. When you pull the old screen out, you've got actually the size that you need. So that kind of helps a little bit in cutting a new piece to put in to replace the screen. I have some screening material here that I had laying around, which is new, but hasn't been used yet, and we're going to cut a piece out of this. Also, I wanted to show you before I start doing this that this is the way the screening material, when you're doing it in large volume, usually buy screening material like this on a large roll, and it comes in all different various widths. And you know, normally you shouldn't buy anything wider than what you really need because it's a waste of money, a waste of material. Or sometimes, if what a lot of people do is if they have regular size windows, they buy a wide one, and if they're not using it for a patio door or something really big, they could just make two screens side by side off of each section to utilize as much of the product as possible and have as little waste as possible. The other thing that you need to know is that screening comes in different colors. This is what they call charcoal, which is probably the most popular color. But they also have like a grayish color, and they have screen that comes in aluminum. Aluminum screening also comes in charcoal, and it comes in bright aluminum, which you don't see that much. But when you're rescreening aluminum screening, it's a little bit of a different ball game. It's similar, it's very similar, and you could probably do it based on the instructions I'm showing you here. But you have to be very careful when you're doing aluminum screening, because if you buy cheap stuff, when you're rolling it into the grooves, sometimes it rips before it actually goes into the groove. A lot of that cheap stuff that comes from China. You don't want to buy any unknown brands. I mean, there's some screening material out there. Let me think off the top of my head. I think one company is called New York Wire, and but buy something that is well known and is higher quality screening when it comes to aluminum screening. Anyway, today we're working with fiberglass, and which is what most residential windows are. They're fiberglass screening. So you always try to be conscious of what you're cutting, and you could use the old frame to cut out the section that you need, or you could use the old screen. It doesn't really matter. But we have the frame right here. It's very small, so we could just basically cut ourselves a section using the old frame. And you come through here with your scissors, and the scissors are very dull, they don't work, so plan B is to use a knife. I have an older table here, which I'm not really worried if it gets scratched up a little bit, so a knife is a fast way to do this. You could just take the screen, hold it down, put your knife on top of it, and just run your knife along the edge like that, and you can see that it cuts real quickly right through the screen, and you got the section that you need. So that's a real fast way of doing it. These shears, we replace windows, so we cut a lot of aluminum with them, and that wears and tears a lot on the blades. And by the way, these blades are replaceable. There's like recessed Phillips screws in here that you take out, and you could take the blades out and you could either sharpen them up or put new ones in, and then it would cut anything like a razor. But after being worn from doing all the window replacement jobs that we're doing and cutting all the aluminum that we bend to make cover the exterior frames of the windows, they call that capping in window replacement. But that's a whole different story. We'll do a video about that sometime. Getting back to screening. You have your section, and as you can see, I cut it so that it's about an inch and a half bigger than what it's supposed to be. Now, there are professional screeners that do this by using one solid piece and going all the way around. But I found what's much easier and this is going to be especially easier for people that are not really that experienced in doing rescreening, is to take this screen, fold it in half, and cut it. So instead of having one piece, you've got two pieces. And then you take a section, like for example, this section here is for this longer end. And what you have to do is you have to start running it into the groove. Now, these tools are made for that purpose. And with these tools, there is one end that's sort of got a, I guess it would be called concave profile in it, and it's made so that you could run the spline into the groove and it stays inside that concave groove. And most other screening tools, they have one end that's got that little bit of a concave groove in it, but the other side is smooth and round, and that's made for actually, once you already have it partially into the track, you could roll it in the rest of the way so it's nice and tight. We usually start with the grooved concave end so that it helps to guide the screen into where it's supposed to be. If you start with the other end, sometimes you ride off, and if you don't know what you're doing, you could put a hole in the new screen, and it really usually causes problems when you're doing the aluminum screening. And these roller tools, they come in different sizes. As you can see, when the wheel has got a smaller diameter, it helps you to get closer into the corners of the screen, whereas a larger diameter would not get as close. And again, you have the grooved concave end, and then you have the regular one for rolling in. And when you get really close to the corners, I like to take a nice flathead and push the screen in the corners so it's nice and tight. And the screen's got to be in all the way around nice and tight. And then the last step is you take a knife and you go around the outside edge and you cut the excess off, and you're done. So let's start. I'll use this, actually I could start by taking my flathead and just pushing this in just to start. And then I take my fingers like this to stretch it a little bit, and I roll the screen, not all the way, but partially into the grooves. Now what I do is I take the whole screen, flip it around, and I take the other half that I cut, and I do the same thing on this end. And the reason why I do it this way is because it helps you to stretch the screen across the frame so that when you're all done, it's not wavy and loose, but you have a nice taut screen across the frame, sort of like you know, the skin on a drum. However, if you have big screens and you pull it really tight, I have to caution you. What happens is that on a big screen, and if the frame is really not strong and you pull it in too tight, you get over here on the screen on the sides, you get what is like an hourglass effect. And you don't want that, because it's not going to fit in the frame properly, and or it could light could be shining through, bugs could be getting in anyway. So you have to be careful to exercise the right amount of tension, and if you have a big screen, not pull it too tight, because it'll pull the long frame ends into, it'll suck them in, and you don't want that. A lot of times what we used to do is when we were doing big screens, we'd have a little piece of wood that we would put in here that's maybe like an 1/8 or 3/16 of an inch thick, and we put it in here, and it wouldn't be tight in there, but just tight enough where it would hold it so that we could roll in the screen without having that hourglass effect in the frame of the screen when we're done. So now we go to the other side, and we what you have to do is you have to kind of like pull the screen so it's a little tight, you know, not too tight, but a little tight, so that you have some tension on the screen, and you get it started again with your flathead. Now you have to be careful with the flathead so you don't just poke a hole in the screen with it. And if you damage anything out here, it's okay, but if you damage anything inside here, obviously, then you got to start from scratch and do it over again. Now what I usually do is when I roll the screen in, and this is the second side, as I'm working my way across, with one hand I'm rolling it in, and with the other hand, my fingers, I'm pulling tension onto the screen so that it has a nice tight fit onto the screen frame. So you just work your way around. You got your two fingers pulling the tension just one step ahead of where you're rolling it in. Go around the corners. So you push your flathead in, turn the corner, push the flathead in again. Take your rolling tool, put a little tension on the screen as you're rolling it in. Now, even though we use the old spline, as we're rolling it in, spline gets old, it stretches a little bit. Usually you end up with a little more than what you had before. No problem. You just take your knife and you cut it right out. Flip it around and do the last side. Again, with the flathead in the corner, put a little tension on it. Take your roller with the concave, the grooved end, push it, pull a little tension on the screen to make sure it's got nice tension like the surface of a drum. Work your way across it. See, this end you didn't have to cut, it fit right into the corner. Come back with your flathead, make sure all your corners are good. Tuck them in, be careful, don't punch a hole in the screen that you just installed. Do all four corners. Now at this stage you could use your other tool, which does not have the groove, and you could take that tool, small diameter or large, it doesn't really matter, it's a small screen, I'll use the small diameter one, and you roll in your screen all the way so it's nice and tight. You roll it in the rest of the way. This time you're putting a little more pressure down into the screen. Something that happens often when you're doing screening jobs like this is you put so much tension on the screen, it causes the screen frame to rack a little bit. But you don't have to worry about that, because when you put it into the frame will hold it straight. And the last stage is you take your knife and you go into the corner. Now remember, you're cutting the outside edge. You don't cut anywhere near, because that'll just make the screen loose. You have to cut on the outside of the spline. Put your knife in there and just cut right along the edge like this. Make sure your tip is nice and sharp. And then you have to go through the corners, you know, with a little extra effort. And you might have to do it 2 or 3 times until you get the corner cut out. See, when you're going into the corner, you have to kind of like move it, wiggle it, and try to make sure that if there's a strand that you didn't cut, you go back with your sharp tip and just keep cutting it. If you ride off like that, don't worry about it. You could just go back in here, because if you stay in the groove and you put a little tension down as you're cutting, it's gonna keep the blade from popping out. Get this corner here. We're coming towards the end. And now we got most of it cut off except this little section over here. Come back here and go over it. You have a little strand here, you could just cut that right off, and the screen is done. But it's got a lot of tension on it, so it's wrecked. But like I said, you don't have to worry about it too much. You probably didn't have to, maybe I put a little more tension on it than I should have. You have to, like after you do a few of these, you'll know that if you don't want to put as much tension on it, it won't rack like that. But it's not a big deal, because over time it'll stretch. And now that you have it done, and again, this is not an up and down window, this is a slider, you put the screen back into the frame. So you pop in the top. C-springs always go on the top of a slider. Push it in position, lift it up, and then it'll pop down by itself. And you see, nice clean job, the screen is all done. So that's basically what goes on with sliders. You're probably not going to do sliders unless maybe you're doing basement windows. Usually that's where you have this size shape window in the basement window. So before we go, I want to just show you one more thing. This is a double hung window. This is made by a company called Royal Prime, and this is gives you a more of a typical example of how the screen comes out on a double hung up and down window. You see it comes out to the side, and the C-springs are on the other side. So when you pull the screen, old screen out, see it's got the spline just like the slider did, and you rescreen it and you're ready to pop it back in, you usually, almost always, the spline ends up being on the outside. And you know that it's on the outside because this screen has a little handle, a ridge, and the ridge has to go to the inside of the house so the person can operate the screen by lifting it up and down using this little rail that's on the bottom. And when you're done rescreening it and you're ready to pop it back in, you put it back into that groove, and then you push it until it goes into the groove, and then there's a little ridge makes it stop so it stays in the middle. Press it down and it's done. Again, this particular window is made by actually it's sold by Royal Prime in New Jersey. It's a very good quality window, and if you notice, the window's got sort of like a creamy color. It's like a slight off-white, which is considered a color for like a little bit of a higher end window, whereas this slider, the slider that I showed you before, it's got your white, Snow White, hospital white. It's a little dirty, it's been bouncing around the shop for a while, but you can see in contrast to the other window, it's a slightly different shade. This is sort of like a blue white, and this is like a creamy, like almost like the difference between blue light on a fluorescent light and a warm light on a fluorescent light. This would be like the warm light on a fluorescent light, and the cheaper windows would be like a blue light on a fluorescent light. And as you can see on this company, there's the symbol for S, which is Silverline. These were Silverline windows. A little quick tip on, or a little history on these windows. This company was made by a company called Silverline. It was a guy whose, I think his name was Silverman, and he built up the company, named the company partially after himself and called it Silverline. Built it up to a pretty big company here in New Jersey. He might have had other factories around the country, I don't know. But at one point he sold the whole operation to Andersen. And this is actually the window that Andersen later on made into what I think they call now the American Craftsman. And you can recognize the window by this special, wavy extrusion and framing that holds the screen frame in place. So this is their signature screen framing and look, the way that it has from the exterior. They make these windows in double hungs, and they make them in sliders, and they usually go in Home Depot. They sell them in Home Depot under the name of American Craftsman. It's okay window, but it's basically your no frills replacement window. But the screens are rescreened pretty much the same way, whether you're working with a Home Depot window or with a higher end window, or even if you're working with your top of the line windows, like your higher end Andersens and your Pellas and your Marvins. Pretty much the screens are done the same way, except with Andersen, sometimes some of their casement window screens, instead of using a rubber spline, they have a metal spline that goes in. And that'll be another video. If you have that situation, you could contact us at Window Mechanic. You can contact us at windowmechanic@hotmail.com, or you could call me if you like. My name is George, and my cell number is 973-223-2202, and I would be glad to answer any questions you have. I do mostly window repairs in the North New Jersey area. However, also one of the things that we do to help to sponsor this instructional video is we sell some products that we also have developed that have to do with cleanliness. And these products go under the name of Copper Shield soap. And we also make a colloidal silver product, which we sell under the name of Silver Shield. And Silver Shield, we sell 16 ounces of Silver Shield for $29.95, and it's 30 parts per million. If you know anything about colloidal silver, you'll know that this is a very good price compared to everything else that's on the market. And this is 16 ounces of Copper Shield, which just like silver, copper is also an antimicrobial. It kills germs. But we found that copper seems to make more sense for external use, and colloidal silver seems to make more sense for internal use. But before you do anything with colloidal silver, make sure you read up on it and feel comfortable in using it. But it's a very good germ killer. I mean, if you cut yourself, you can put that on the cut and kill the germs. And this soap with the copper also does the same thing. The product sells for $9.95 for this 16-ounce pump container of colloidal Copper Shield soap, and the colloidal silver is $29.95. However, because people are used to paying like $2-3 for their soap, and they're dubious about the germ-killing quality of the soap, and they haven't really tested it and experimented with it, we've developed a 1-gallon container that we sell for $19.95. And if you refill this container with this 1 gallon, you should be able to get 8 refills from 1 gallon, which would mean that would reduce the price of this for you down to $2.50 per refill, and that makes it the same price as any other soap, but it gives you that real extra advantage with the germ killing. And this is not just germ killing with some kind of pesticide or some kind of harmful chemical, cancer-causing chemical. We're talking about a natural, healthy way to kill germs that is totally harmless. It could be used for babies, it could be used for, you could use it and be rest assured that you're not doing anything to harm yourself or your family. And these days, with the kind of issues that are developing, I think that Copper Shield soap is a product that makes a lot of sense for a lot of people. So please check out our products. Either we'll probably list them on our website on windowmechanic.com, but we also have a website for this, which is coppershieldsoap.com, so you can go there and get the information you need on it, and give us a contact, give us some feedback, and thank you for your time.